me share my screen. Let
Okay.
me just make sure. Yeah, I need to share my screen. Let me just make sure. Okay. Right.
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. So, good evening, everyone. How are you doing? Good.
We're good.
Good. I don't see myself giving a lecture. I hope that, since especially we have a smaller group, I think we could always just have a discussion while I'm presenting the material. So, and I think that would make the presentation more interesting anyway. So feel free to jump in and answer a question. And if you could show your face, that would even help the speaker even more. So I don't feel like I'm speaking to a wall or something. But in general, thank you for participating. And before I start, just curious, when you hear this topic, what were you thinking about? Like what impression do you have when I presented this topic? I'm just curious on what people are hoping to hear. Anyone want to give a shot?
Anybody? I'm the host, so
Yeah,
I
it's all
could
yours,
jump in.
everybody.
sure.
Thank you, Peter, for taking your time to share your wisdom with us. My name is Lee. I guess from the topic, I can register with the within part, because I think the practice is cultivating something that's within, right? The mind, the Buddha nature, that's all within. And then flourishing with others, my understanding is we need others to practice with. We need to support others, and I need to be supported by others. So we're in the collective.
Awesome. Good. That's a good start. That's a good start. So you're hoping that I may be talking about something that's generated within.
I don't know what to hope from you specifically, but I'm just an open end receiver.
Sure. Great. Anyone else? Just curious, what were you hoping to hear? So I know what's the expectation. Not saying that could meet the expectation. I'm just curious what kind of expectation we have out here. Shanlei, do you have any?
Yeah, well, when I saw a topic for the first time, I really, want to be here to listen what you can talk about, because, it seems like we can generate a lot of things from deep from our heart and offering to the others. But to personally speaking, I feel quite suffering inside, because every day when I look at the news, I just feel this world is doomed, right? This new war started here in the world. I think we really need to find out what we can offer to the other people around us to, find peace for ourselves and also find peace for other people. So
Right.
into your talk, yeah.
Right. I mean, right now the world's not going. It's not definitely not a nice place at this moment. That's for sure. Yeah, that's true. Jay, anything you're hoping?
Actually, I didn't see the topic. I go to all of these talks because they're uniformly excellent. But when I look at it, I'm actually thinking of the Heart Sutra, which I recite every morning. And it obviously we want to thrive from within, but we don't want to do that as individuals. We want to do that as a community or as a world. So we can't really thrive from within unless others are flourishing as well. And that's our hope.
Yeah, that's a very important point. It's like sometimes it's kind of difficult just do it on your own, really. Yeah. Anyone else want to give a shot? I don't know. Miranda, you there? I'm sorry, this is like my professional habit. I teach in college, so I always jump to the people left and right, and yeah, so that's just what I do this whole every day.
That
Teaching.
that is good, Peter, right? In making this interactive and that enhance the learning and the exchanges too as well.
Yeah, because if I'm just keep
Completely
talking
for-
myself, you don't really need me. You could just read the book or something. Seriously, I mean, I'm sure the internet give you more information than I do. I mean, I think presentation, in a sense, is to flourish together, right? We're sharing our experiences to each other. It's not that me know more than you. It's that I'm just opening up a topic where we can share our experiences together.
Mhm.
Right, Gene? Any expectation? Did I pronounce name right? Gene?
She may be on mute. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Or
Sean,
Debbie?
Any talk
Hello.
anything will be benefit me. Thank you.
Huh?
Any talk will be benefit me.
Any topic
And-
will benefit you? That's such a
Yeah.
nice nice and broad
Thank you.
Buddhist comments. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Warren, do you have any expectation? Just curious.
So just in terms of talks, and obviously I'm the host and volunteer for Dharma Drum Mountain, whether it's DDRC or locally. And but just from the topic alone, it's pretty much like what others are saying. Like when I looked at this, is that when we thrive from within, from the inside out, that's also helping with others, right? And we do have a Sunday session, group meditation sessions every Sunday.
Mhm.
And folks that you see on here, most of them are frequent or dedicated practitioners here.
Oh, great. Well, it's always great.
And and we often encourage each other, right? It's because this is not a selfish sport when we practice, right? Not just for ourselves, even though meditation, starting from relaxations and benefiting ourselves at the surface level, by go much deeper through awareness, clarity, and all that good stuff.
Mhm.
And when we become better, others are better too as well, simply because we are better. So this particular topic is just a echoes, what we're trying to do here, right? Is to practice through learning, the kind of like the bird with two wings, both learning and practice. We become better from the inside out. And if we are better, people around us are better. If we do that through the butterfly effect, the whole world gets better. Right?
Yeah.
One small steps from each one of us, one giant step for humanity. And that goes back to Sifu Master Xingyan's vision, right? Or one of the ethos is to uplift the character of humanity.
Yeah.
And the pure land on earth will be right there,
Mm-hmm.
from moment to moment.
Yeah. No, great response. I agree with you very much so. And it's good to know that you're all good Chan practitioners, which also means that I probably don't know more Buddhism than you, in the sense that we are all similar in terms of our practice. So what would I bring that's a bit new to you, that's different than other lecturer? I think would be my profession. So I think my talk in general, I would say my talk either at DDRC or Chan Center, it's always more focusing on psychology instead of the Buddhist doctrinal teaching or something. So I don't want you to think I'm giving you a Dharma talk. I'm giving you a Dharma, small d, not big D, okay? A small d talk, a small Dharma talk, not a big D Dharma talk. Which,
To me, that's even more applicable in daily life, right? It's much closer, and that's really where the practice begins.
And I just give you a little bit of my background because I came to this country at a young age, and as an immigrant, I came as a teenager. So when you come into a country as an immigrant, what you what you do is you usually compare the value system that you know to the new value system. And that becomes sort of a mental habit I have with everything. So when I come to this America, I compare my old culture to the new culture. When I'm learning psychology, for example, I compare psychology, which is the Western culture, to the Eastern psychology. I would argue Buddhist psychology is an Eastern form of psychology, right? So I'm usually, I would say I'm often a person who have foot in two worlds. And what this helped me is often when I learn psychology, my Buddhist practice helped me to understand psychology better. And when I'm learning Buddhism, my psychology training helped me to understand Buddhist idea better. So I think one thing I'm always interested in to look for commonality in both traditions, Western psychology versus Eastern Buddhist approach, right? So that's sort of where I'm coming from. And so when I'm having this topic of flourishing, right? When thriving and flourishing, there are really similar terms. Do you think only Buddhists think about this kind of issue, or people in other culture also think about it? What do you think? New stuff, old stuff? Jay, new stuff, old stuff?
I'm an immigrant myself. And I often think about, not that the cultures were that different. I live in Canada. I've been here 50 years this year. But I did a lot of work with the Vietnamese boat people, for instance, in the late 70s and early 80s. And I've always been fascinated to see how people adapt from one culture to another.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. It gives you perspective. If you can see things from a different viewpoint, well, I'm just repeating myself here, but that's one invaluable thing about having lived in different cultures. It does give you perspective on things like psychology, which you wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah, so great. When you come from two cultures, it kind of give you a new perspective, and sometimes you create new things because you're from two different perspectives. My office is at Soho, New York Soho, and you know what's one famous store at Soho is this place. There's always a long line for this cronut thing. Any of you heard of that cronut? It's like they leave and know about cronut. It's croissant and donuts that combine together.
I would probably into that. I love donuts. And
croissant and donut. And
nice.
It's a long line. I mean, I tasted that. I didn't like it that much, but for some reason, a lot of people like that kind of stuff. So I would say my Buddhist understanding and my psychological training is sort of like cronuts. Like I have a little blend of both culture, right? My Buddhist psychology and my Western psychological training kind of like integrate each other. So the idea of flourishing is nothing new, really, because from the Western perspective, this is something like as old as what Socrates and Aristotle, they talk about like flourishing, right? This whole idea of the eudaimonic happiness, the idea of what does it mean to thrive and flourish. It's not a new idea. It's always been there. So since ancient time, I think people from different culture always try to ask this question: what makes a life a good life? What does it mean to live well? That makes sense, right? I mean, even from the Buddhist perspective, Buddha, of course, he first started out by talking the first noble truth, which is life could be distressful, but people sometimes get stuck with the first truth. I mean, the more important one is really the third one, right? Life could be distressful, but you could actually thrive out of distress and make things better. I mean, that's like the more important message of anything. It's not that life could be distressful, but we could be free. We could be free from suffering. That's the more important question, or more important goal. And I think from both East and West perspective, this is always an interesting question, a question of what makes a life a good life. How do we live well? And what is happiness? Do you guys ask this kind of question? Like, what is happiness? Debbie, do you think about it? What is happiness?
What is happiness to me is be helpful to each other. Wallen is my role model. Since pandemic, he has been running the Sunday team on the middle of his Sunday. So he makes us happy. Maybe I only can speak for myself. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I try my best to help others. And honestly, I'm learning and I'm trying to live in the moment, not to think about the future and not to think about the past. Honestly, I'm practicing. Every day I'm wondering. But when I'm wondering, I remember Wallen say, where your mind is where your body is. So I bring myself back.
Yeah, you're good. You're a good practitioner. You're a good practitioner.
Well, I have been following Wallen for what, 3 years or more, Wallen?
Well, it's not me that you're following. I'm just pointing a little finger to the moon, but we're all following like Sifu, Venerable Guoyuan, right? The abbot, right? That's a bigger finger point to the moon, but they are not the moon itself, right? It's seeking our true nature. But thank you for that, Debbie. Very kind of you. If you're happy, I am happy.
So everyone, but every culture wants to know what that moon is, right? You see, it's not just for the Asians, it's not just for the Indians, not just for the Chinese or Japanese or Korean. And I mean, every culture are interested in what does it mean to live a good life. Now, what is the common belief that what a good life is? In a capitalist culture right now, like what is a common belief? If you ask the young people, like, what does it mean to have a good life?
To have a good job, to be in good health, to have, good company, and to retire happily after.
Yeah, good job, good people that surround you, right?
Yeah.
How about money?
Some people definitely think so. That's for sure.
Money's nice.
Yep.
Sure. And do you think good life just means feeling happy? Good positive emotion? Is that what good life is? Yeah, Warren, do you think that's not what good life is? Just having good emotions?
Good emotions is obviously it's good, but it's just like what we learn, right? And it doesn't take practice of Buddhism to realize that nothing ever stays the same or permanent.
Yeah.
So
good feeling doesn't last forever, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, good feeling doesn't last forever. So, this is the kind of question philosophers like to ask. And what is psychology? Psychology is really philosophy that utilizes scientific method to study the same kind of question. So psychologists are interested in this kind of question, especially recent psychology, especially the recent movement of psychology. and that's a new branch right now in the psych field. We call it the positive psychology, and the positive psychologists are very interested in this kind of question. What makes a life a good life? What does it mean to have a subject? What does it mean to live happily ever after, right? I mean, these are century-old questions. But, before we get to psychology, here, just a review for all Chan practitioners. These are the kind of instruction that we were taught by Sifu, right? How to live a good life. If you want to live a good life in general, I think these are sort of the general principles we as a Chan practitioner can follow, right? We always want to bring our mind to the present, which means we learn to focus on the task at hand, but relaxed, natural, clear manner, right? And although when we focus on present, we don't regret, but we do reflect on our mistakes if there are any. We don't worry about our future, but we do plan about our future, right? I mean, these are some of the sort of basic attitude we have. And as a Chan practitioner, we always also pay attention to ethical behaviors. I think that's like one of the most important aspects of Buddhism. Is not just you're just meditating, but it's really cultivating of virtue, certain kind of virtue, right? Especially wisdom and compassion, the kind of virtuous behavior that so the kind of insight you gain from your practice, you want to demonstrate that behaviorally, not just to keep it to yourself, right? The whole function of wisdom is compassion, if anything. And I think if you want to be a good Zen practitioner, you pay attention to livelihood, correct livelihood, right? So everything matters. Not only we learn to harmonize the way we live our lives, such as how we eat, how we sleep, how we keep our environment clean, which also relate to environmental protection, right? How we cherish, count our blessings, live with simplicity. And of course, mental training is a very important aspect of Chan practice. And we don't just practice by ourselves, but we practice with a group, Sangha. So these are sort of the old tradition. But from a psychologist's perspective, the key question for psychologists is what? How do we know they work or not, right? I mean, as a scientist, that's what you ask, right? How do we know these instruction works? So what branch of psychology would be interested in this? Positive psychology. Positive psychology would be interested. What is happiness? What is well-being? What are the virtues? What are the function of it? How we measure them? And what's the effect of them? And how do we know that's true? See, these are the kind of questions positive psychology would be interested in. So if anything, I think my talk really would focus on positive psychology and less about Chan, because I think we all have some basic understanding of the Chan practice, I would assume, right? I mean, that makes sense to me. Yeah. So here are just some of the basic definition and basic contribution from Buddhist psychology to positive psychology. You all heard about mindfulness, I assume, and mindfulness is getting very popular lately, right? If anything, mindfulness is very popular, and my research interest is in mindfulness. So this is sort of my research area, and I think before year 2000, mindfulness is still not as well studied, but like since 2000 and after, especially when you hit 2014, there's a lot of contribution from the scientific field towards mindfulness. And where did mindfulness come from? Buddhist practice. That's where mindfulness came from. And So in the field of psychologists are always interested in Buddhism since the 1900s, believe it or not. I mean, the psychologists actually pay attention to Buddhism since the beginning, like since William James, the founder of modern psychology. I mean, there's always an interest in it. But I think it's really towards the 90s, the 2000s, where there's a boom in terms of studying the effects of mindfulness, the effects of meditation, studying the effects of having a clear mind. These are sort of just coming later on. And so I would say the field of positive psychology also pay a lot of attention to what Buddhists have to offer. So here are just some of the sort of the common ideas from Buddhism that has contributed to modern psychology, especially positive psychology. So some of the things from Buddhism that positive psychologists are interested in are things like mindfulness, loving kindness practice, or compassion, especially sometimes some of the psychologists are focused on self-compassion. That's like some of the common interests here. There's this psychologists are interested in the effect of attachment and grasping, and how does that affect our well-being. And the whole idea of understanding the nature of self better, as well as what are the kind of experiences that can transcend the small self into sort of a more spiritual and meaningful way. Sounds good? Yeah. Of course, we know in the Buddhism, there's no true self. But, you know, from the Western perspective, you always need to have something to study. So you need to have something to focus on. So sometime when you, as a psychologist, you would study the wise mind. So instead of the ordinary mind, you try to study the wise mind. So these are just some of the interesting things that positive psychologists are interested in on how Buddhism can contribute. So, by the way, before I move on, any of you heard about positive psychology, just by any chance? Yeah, Li Fan, what have you heard about?
I think it's kind of like a mainstream, like you said, recently populated kind of theory of, you know, how to be happy, backed by science.
So
Science, modern day science.
have you learned it in school or?
It's just it's like in the popular discourse, you know, a mainstream discourse of, you know, to be happy. But like in school, maybe there's some infiltration. Maybe at a psych class, there's like a chapter, but never, you know, and a lot of podcasts talk about it.
Yeah.
A lot of the social media talked about it.
Yeah, sure. That's correct. Yeah, not only there's class about it, some of the most popular courses, the most popular psychology courses in many universities, such as Yale, Harvard, is the course on positive psychology. That is the most popular course. So what I'm doing today is just give you a quick introduction, and then you could definitely go check up on all the material from positive psych, which I think is quite interesting. So when did positive psychology start? Just give you some basic idea. Positive psychology start around the 1990s, where Martin Seligman was the new president then, and what he has noticed something in the field of psychology. He felt that in general, the psychology from the past are often interested in bad things in life, like or the worst things in life. But for some reason, it seems like the field of psychology spend less time studying things like joy, hope, courage. But what people are often most interested in are studying things like violence, addiction, pathology, you know, prejudice, like if you look at the scientific literature, it's very interesting. It's always focused a lot more on negative than positive. And actually, I guess that's kind of true, right? If you look at the news, what kind of news do you see? What kind of news do you pay attention to? I mean, if you want to make a news, if you have a news company, you want to make money, you want to scare people, right? I mean, that's the tactic to make money. You want to scare people. And if anything, you want to scare the people who have time to read the news, which is the older people. So a good news company is to make it scary for the old people. You definitely draw people's attention, right? So there is something in human nature that we often focus on negative instead of positive. So Martin Seligman say, you know, the field of psychology, you need to kind of start to focus more on the positive. And so here is an example on how the psychologists are inspired to study on the more positive side. So here is a typical example of how psychologists study positive emotion. This is one of the most popular measure for happiness or subjective well-being, and or actually this is called a life satisfaction skill, basically the satisfaction with life skill. Started around 1980s, and simple skill but very effective. When I say it's a simple skill but very effective, I actually meant, I mean, it's a good measure. And how do we know a good measure? That takes like 2 semesters of grad school work to tell you why it's a good measure. But in general, to develop a good measure, you need a lot of statistics to demonstrate it's a good measure. How do we know a good measure? Simply put, if I give this test to a happy person, they will score higher than the person who's not so happy in the real world. Then you know that's a good measure, right? What's a good ruler? If you have it's the same thing like a ruler, right? A good ruler would be telling you who's taller than any other person in the real world. It's the same concept. So this is a good measure of happiness from as far as the scientific evidence goes. So they ask questions like this, right? In most ways, my life is close to my ideal, and then you answer from like 1 to 7, you know, and then the condition of my life are excellent, blah, blah, blah. So these are just some of the key questions. I mean, you could do it yourself even quickly on your own, but I mean, you know, this is not the point of today's today's presentation, but just give you an idea. This is just one of the many methods psychologists would use to measure well-being and satisfaction. And from this kind of measure, you could generate data. For example, here are one example from like positive psychology studies, right? And this is an older data, but still serve the purpose. So they, you know, this is basically Time magazine. They did a survey and they asked about 1,009 adult Americans on how happy they are. So if you look at this for a second, how happy you are. 68% of people who make 35 and under a year say most of the time they feel okay. People who make 35 to 50, 81% of them say, yeah, most of the time they feel good, okay. And, you know, people who make a lot more money also feel happy, but not a lot more than, you know, like normally we think the more money you have, the happier you are, right? But if you look at the income here, it seems like it doesn't make too much of difference. That makes sense? Here's one interesting aspect, right? One interesting aspect about this. And also another interesting aspect about this data is that it seems like although money matters, but it gives us a hope, right? Doesn't matter you're poor or rich, you still could have a chance to feel good about life in general. So that's one data. Here's another data. would you say that so far you have lived the best possible life that you could have? A very good life, a very blah, blah, blah. And, you know, a good chunk of people say their life is pretty good, you know, very good to good. I mean, that's a nice number of people. And 80% of people say they usually woke up happily, and good chunk of people say they feel optimistic. Now, any interesting or comments about the data? Anything you think that's interesting here?
So the first half, they try to correlate between happiness, between happiness and income. So basically, you're saying generally it's income unrelated or monetary unrelated.
Not too related. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a trend, but the trend is not powerful, right? It's not like if you
Yeah.
have a lot of money, you're gonna be like 99.9% happier than the rest of people. It's just you may be doing a little bit better based on this data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of interesting. Okay. So that this kind of question, then you start to wonder, okay, do money make people happy, right? So this remind me of quite a story. A bunch of philosophers was hanging out in a bar, and suddenly God shows up. You know, God shows up in the bar, and God's like, "Today I'm in a good mood, so I'm going to give you a choice, and I'm going to make your wish come true. I could either give you $100 million or wisdom. Which one would you pick?" So Shenlai, which one would you pick? $100 million or wisdom?
Well, rationally, I would say wisdom, but emotionally, I would say money.
Jay, which one would you pick?
Wisdom.
Wisdom. Yeah,
I
wisdom.
already have enough money.
Ah, okay. You have more than enough.
I have enough to live on comfortably for the rest of my life. So
Okay.
it doesn't factor in.
Okay. Debbie, which one would you want? $100 million or wisdom? You know.
I would like to have wisdom and have healthy life.
You want a wisdom and healthy life. And Warren, which one you prefer?
So I think that happiness by nature, a person who has the wisdom, or actually it's innate in our true nature, right? When we become more and more realizing or work towards that, maybe I myself still far from it, is maybe seeing a glimpse of what true happiness may be, right? And so really money doesn't really count a whole lot. But then again, that goes back to the hopefully I'm not start up another topic or conversation that takes too long. But remember that Maslow's law of food and shelter at the basic needs. If folks are struggling, right, like so many of them out there in the world, that they are struggling with their food and shelters, the most basic needs at the bottom level, right? It's where their next meal are hard to find. And meaning that their basic needs will not be met from maybe even from day to day or moment to moment or meal to meal, then it may be hard for them to be happy. But that is not to say that, folks in that situation are not happy. Right. But probably just generally speaking, but personally, just from past experiences, that money cannot buy happiness, right?
So you pick wisdom.
We ended up very suffering even more, even though it was a bad example. Like when I was growing up, like just like I came over to the States when I was young, and I love fries, right? So growing up, I like to have fries. So one time I went to McDonald's and bought four large fries.
Okay. You
Right.
really like fries, yeah.
But after four big large fries, guess what happens? I felt sick.
I bet.
Yeah, case in point.
So pleasure is good, but only to a certain point, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the story goes, one of the philosophers say, yeah, give me wisdom. So God's like, okay, I grant you wisdom. So then God like put a lightning, he strike with the lightning, and suddenly he become wiser. The philosopher become a lot wiser. So his other friends like, yo, what happened? So how did you feel? And the philosopher's like, yeah, I should have picked the money instead of wisdom. Well, I'm gonna argue from the Buddhist perspective. I would pick money. Why is that? Because from Buddhist perspective, we already have wisdom, right? Right? We're already wise. I mean, no one can give you wisdom because you're already wise. You just didn't realize it. So from Buddhist perspective, you take the money. You already have the treasure. You don't need another person to give you the treasure, right?
Very good. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, that's just a story. That's just a joke. But I mean, I think there's some meaning behind this joke, right? Which is people are always interested in how does money play out in our life. I would say money definitely provide ways for us to seek pleasure and happiness. But I think wisdom, of course, in general, open more doors that allow us to find. It's like wisdom give you many more different ways to find meaning and purpose in life. Money is just one of the many ways. So we don't deny money, but at the same time, we don't want to like grasp onto it. Now, here's another result from the same study. So when you ask people, so what makes you feel happy? Right now, majority of people say they feel pretty happy. And then when you ask people like, what are the source of your happiness? There are all sort of the common sources: relationship, children, friendship, contributing to the life of the other, your relationship with spouse, how much control you have, things that you do, relationship with your parents, your spiritual life, holiday. Okay. And when you ask what's the one thing in your life has brought you the greatest happiness, people say children, grandchildren, family, spouse doesn't, 9% spouse. Okay. Spouse doesn't make it too high there, but okay. But and then so if you look at it more, and so what do you do to improve your mood? If you want to improve your mood, so number one choice is always what? Connection, relationship, right? So the question is, do money buy your relationship, right? If we know relationship is one of the important key point in making people happier. And prayer, look, meditate. People meditate, usually the woman meditate more than men, but they still meditate. They meditate, helping others, right? Helping others, take a good bath, play with your pet, exercise, go out there and eat, sex. So anything surprising from this results here? Or not too surprising? Yeah, in Shanghai?
Yeah, I was just so surprised that having children or grandchildren was such a strong factor to make people happy. Now I understand my parents why they're so, worrying about me and really want me to have a baby for.
Well, children are important to people for many, many reasons, but children is important.
Yeah.
It's like it's interesting. This is cross-cultural too. Like in every culture, somehow taking care of your next generation is a big deal. But one thing we often say about children, often children, we call children what? Our immortality project.
Mm.
Gene, that makes sense to you? Gene, yeah?
Yeah, but yeah, it's like immortality project. But if I think about like, the education, because I was grow up in China mainland, and if I think about like the education on all these things I went through, I really don't want to have this continue on my next generation actually. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, China is even more important. I mean, at one point, everyone will have one kid. I mean, that's like all the focus on you. I mean, so yeah, children is important. Well, and in the Chinese culture, of course, that's like having children is always like the big deal. Now, I'm just presenting this to you. This is one kind of study, right? Right. You ask people how happy you are, and they just look at the correlation between happiness and a whole bunch of things. Here is, yeah, Debbie.
Sorry for interrupting. Peter, I'd like to know, we just say relationship, right? To have good relationship. But in the Buddhism world, we say everything is impermanent. So should we have relationship, or because it's impermanent? Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand.
Thank you.
Yeah. What is impermanence or emptiness? Right. The core teaching is what? Sunyata, right? Emptiness, right? And what's emptiness? One way to translate emptiness, I would say, is relationship. Emptiness is precisely relationship. Because what makes you is everything that's not you. So what makes you are interconnected with everything that's not you. So Buddhism is all about relationship. It's really the realization of that relationship. That's very important, I would say. It's the realization of this interconnectedness. So I would say Buddhism is what, not only focusing on a relationship that you know, but also focusing on a relationship that you don't know. But we're not Buddha, so we're not going to realize all that yet. But even in like, there's a colloquial saying: before you become the Buddha, you need to have good relationship with your sangha, right? We always say that. That makes sense, right? Like, how when you go to temple, you still want to be a nice person. You don't just want to be like someone dislikable just because we're all Buddhists and we're forgiving and all that. No, I mean, I think if you look at what makes people happy, there's always something to do with connection and relationship, especially people. Yeah. So I would say that's and that's cross-cultural, not just in the Buddhist world, but in every culture. If we look at those people who live a good life, they tend to have good relationship in general. Yeah. So I don't want you. Yeah. So I don't want you to think that we just meditate and then we should meditate in the mountain and then that's it, right? We don't do that, right? I mean, Sivu don't tell us to do that, right? Yeah. Right. If anything, we should what? We should notice the empty nature of ourselves, which also means what? The realization that who we are today came from many helping hands. And because you realize that, therefore you stick out your helping hands to others. That's the kind of connection that we make in general, at least from my understanding in terms of relationship, right? In terms of relationship. But I don't want you to think this is the final say on this kind of data. Because this is just one way to study happiness, right? The psychologists ask people what makes you feel happy, and they look at all the stuff. They ask you in sort of, you kind of have to judge how happy you are from a global perspective. Do you understand what I meant? Like a global perspective, like this, like, you know, in most of ways, my life is close to my ideal. That's like a global answer, right? Like, you know, like ask you to reflect in general how you feel. This is one kind of question. So far, so good. However, are you sure this is an accurate way to measure happiness? So some psychologists would challenge whether this is an accurate way to measure happiness. So they come up different ways to measure happiness. So the other type of measure that we have, is and this is the older version. We ask people to fill out diaries, right? Like diaries, or we just ask you, okay, think about all the things you have done yesterday. Tell me what makes you feel happy, not happy. Basically, that's it. Just what you have done yesterday, the same time till now. Just out of this 24 hours, the past 24 hours, the things that you do, how do you feel about the things that you do, for example? That's another way to measure your happiness. That makes sense? Yeah. Just how happy you are, how sad you are, how angry you are. So in the past 24 hours. And some psychologists even use like, back then they used like pager, beeper, like, you know, you'd be wearing it, they would call you up and say, hey, how you feeling right now? It's a very kind of a very direct way of measuring how you feel. And do you think that kind of data would be the same as the one we see here? Probably a little bit different, you think? Probably a little bit different. So when we use this kind of method, then you find out, and they originally did this on like 900 women, and they found that the 5 most positive activities for these women were: number 1, sex; 2, socializing; 3, relaxing; 4, meditating; 5, eating and exercise, watching TV. The worst thing on the list is taking care of my children and do housework. This is odd. That makes sense? On the previous measure, they say children is the most wonderful thing they have. And then when you really ask people how they feel every day, children's like the worst.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. Jarrell, what do you think? You're there.
I think that I think they really do love their children, but it's still exhausting, and it comes out, and that feeling comes out when someone honestly asks them like how they feel. I think it's more of the exhaustion topic, especially if it's like toddlers or either toddlers or teenagers.
Yeah. And you see how people are like fighting about kids, right? Like who's taking care of, who's doing the chore, who's taking care of kids. I mean, having kids is not fun. I mean, good chunk of time, right? This is a good example on what is happiness, right? So we know from these 2 studies, and happiness maybe is not focusing on what positive emotions only, right? Good life is more than just positive emotions, because when you are taking care of your kid, that's a lot of like work, right? It's and I think the question then is really, is there a difference between the experiencing self versus the memory self? Because the first kind of data is more based on what's called a memory self, right? When I ask who you are, you kind of like have an overall view of who you are as a person. But when I try to assess you at that moment, the you could be very different at that moment. Interesting. Hey, Jay. Yeah.
I think that the memory self or the previous screen, somebody else has supplied the categories. And I was having difficulties responding to that because a lot of the categories don't apply to me. For instance, raising my children. My youngest child is 49 years old. It doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
Whereas when you ask me to keep a log of what I've done over the last 24 hours, the experiencing self, that's more genuine because it reflects the things that I'm actually doing in my time of life and in my place. So we're not responding to preset categories.
Well, I think, Jerry, you're pointing out something correct, which is those questions cannot be applied to everyone. That's why you don't see so and in general, this is, again, research in general does really not apply to individual anyway. It's always based on average, right? So we don't want to say this apply to everyone, but at the same time, it gives you a glimpse on what most of people looks like on a bigger scale. So that's the sort of the basics of statistics anyway. It's sort of, we know everyone makes different amount of money, but when you look at the average, where are people in general? So that's the kind of data. But here's the debate though. If we say the experiencing self is a true self, then are we saying most of women hate their kid? Because you see, most of the women say they really don't like their kids, taking care of kids, right? That's the debate here. Interesting, right? So, and the reason why I'm presenting this to you is to really, I guess I'm trying to open up a conversation on what does it mean to live a good life? What does it mean to live a good life? So we know one aspect of good life could be related to positive emotion. But chances are it's more than just positive emotion, right? Because there are plenty of time where you have negative emotions, yet you still feel good about it. Right? I mean, having kids have a lot of negative emotions. Marriage may not always be easy, but when you know how, this is a little bit like this. Do you guys go to travel? Do you travel sometime?
Yes.
And do you notice how when you travel, it's actually a lot of work?
Yes.
I'm tired all the time when I go to travel. It's just like, you know how you finish your lunch, then you have busy looking where you want to eat for dinner. And then after you finish eating dinner, you try to figure out where you want to go next day. And you like try to figure out what's the best place to go. You try to go to the places everyone wants to go. And when you go there, you're busy taking the photos. And then you move on to the next stop. You want to make sure everything is shown on the Instagram. Right? It's actually a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of hassle. I always feel very tired from the trip. But when I go back home, I look at the photos, I'm like, oh yeah, I had a great, wonderful vacation. Debbie, you found that?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, but I go with the clue, I join the group, like the travel group, so I don't have to worry. As long 6:30 in the morning call, and then they plan for my day for me. But it's that's
you
less
just follow
stress.
you just follow the group, right?
Yeah, so they take me, the attraction place. May I ask a question that relate to me?
Sure.
when we measure the 24-hour happy or not happy. So for myself, I have thyroid cancer. So I am happy. I woke up, I'm happy, but my mood jump up and down. Because I'm unable to control my mood. So how are we going to measure that?
Well, that's the question. Well, I mean, based on what I said earlier, there are two ways to measure it, right? From a general global perspective, from the memory self perspective, right? You say you overall you feel okay, but from the daily experience perspective, it could be very different. And you kind of have to take these two angles in consideration. I don't think you want to focus just on one, but you want to take the whole picture, right? That's what scientists do, right? You don't want to just take one set of data. You want to look at things from many different angles. And not to say there's one true angle either. It's just these are just many different angles of try to understand. Right. So I'm going to use the pleasure aspect. I'm going to use a vacation again, right? So I went to like India a few years ago. That was the toughest trip I ever had. I went to the pilgrimage, right? You go to like where all the Buddhas born, passed away, and it was like difficult. I mean, like the bus ride, the food. I mean, everyone's having diarrhea and choke. I mean, and like puking from the food, the water that you're not used to, and it's a very tough trip. And when I was at India, I was like, why did I put myself through all this? Like, so if someone measure me at that time, I'd be like, I don't want to be there. But when I come back to America, I'm like, this is the trip everyone should have. That's the best trip in my life. The most spiritual trip everyone should try. So how do we reconcile these two? And I think it's the same thing when you go to retreat, right? You know how like when you go to retreat, the first 3 days, like, why am I here? I should have go home. And when the retreat is over, it's like, oh, I'm going to do it again next year. You had that experience, Warren?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
It's like the first day, especially, it's like, why, oh, why am I here?
You go into the retreat and, you keep telling yourself, right, the next one, I'm just going to be ready, right, rest well and prep, but always, right, busy with work all the way to the last minute. Go to the retreat, tired, right, slept the whole way. And after that, slept well and ready to really do some meditation. It's time to go home. Yeah, exactly.
So people are interested. Yeah, Jay?
It's occurred to me, I've been to Bodh Gaya. We've been there to sit under the Bodhi tree where Buddha Shakyamuni sat. And we had no problems with that at all, but I wasn't in a group. And I found that I'm happiest when I am in control of the decisions that I make, that when I can live deliberately. So that was all planned out. I did get sick in Kathmandu, but I had that all sorted out too with the right type of insurance. That I think that my life is the happiest when I can live deliberately, when I'm not subject to constraint, when I can make the decisions, when other people are making decisions for me, like on a tour bus, I'm not happy at all. So for some reason, happiness for me is tied to deliberate decision making.
You point out something that the research point out, which is similar. People tend to feel happier when they feel they're in control. Yeah, that is, and not only when they feel they're in control, they feel proud of what they have decided to do. Like when you decide what you want to do and you feel proud of what you did, that actually make people feel a lot happier. even if the process, even whatever you chose to do could be very emotionally painful, for example.
Yeah.
And this is what Nietzsche was saying, right? When you have a why to live, you can bear with almost any how to live, right? So we know good life then is not just about pleasure, but also some kind of what? Meaning, purpose, as well as achievement. That makes sense? Yeah. So let me hold on. Let me just stop here for a second. I'm gonna make this the last slide, but just for discussion purpose. So not only the scientists keep track of how happy people are, but they also keep track of the trend of how people are since 1948. And this is the trend. And did you notice any trend?
It's pretty consistent, right?
Pretty
Throughout.
consistent from here.
Yeah.
I guess in general it looks consistent, but if you look at the 2019, it's going what?
Oh, it's going down, trending down. Correct.
And this is the percent of unhappiness is going what? Going up.
Oh, I see. So that the
In
bottom one is not
our
happening.
time, right? So
I see. Yeah.
But I mean, of course, look at the bigger picture. It seems okay.
Well, I think there's another trend after 2008, right? After 2008, the fairly happy people are going down a little bit, and not
2008, yeah. Well, 2008 is a famous year.
yeah.
Yeah. It's so it's like, and so this is something to ponder about that a little bit, right? So do you think our current generation, next generation are doing well in general? Especially, I think our next generation are living as a generation of social media, right? If you think about this for a second, our next generation is really the generation with social media, meaning that they're born with social media. And psychologists are interested in the effect of social media as well, right? It's like when social media came out, there is the promise of social media is they're gonna bring people together. They're gonna make people connected more and more happier. And do you think that's the effect of social media? Help people to be more together, to communicate more, to feel happier? No, Shanghai, you don't think so?
No, I don't think so. I think social media dividing people quite more than, getting people together. Because
Yeah.
you have more connection with people all over the world, but actually you're lacking of real communication with people in your life.
Yeah, we're like having more connection on Facebook, but less real people connection. I mean, if
Yeah,
anything, if anything, it's quite odd, right? It's quite odd. And do you think social media make people feel good in general about themselves?
I don't think so.
Because everything you see is always about what you don't have.
Right. Well, what I normally see on social media is either other people living a better life than me, or other people living a more miserable life than me, which make me feel also sad. So I don't think it make me feel happier.
Because everyone only present their most the best light.
Yeah.
Everyone's creating a facade of themselves on social media. So we only get to see the facade, and because we only see the facade, we only also see what we don't have. So it's quite interesting how social media is really has such an effect on people, and they're very divisive. They definitely divide people into very very oppositional way. So this is the future challenge for our next generation, really, I would say. And how can charm practice help people to deal with it? Li Fan, you think charm practice can help us to deal with the effects of social media, Instagram, Facebook?
Maybe part of a solution, I guess, is
Huh?
to grow that awareness, the feeling that it doesn't really feel that good to be on social media all the time. And once they have that awareness, they resort to a solution. Maybe it's, setting a screen time. Maybe it's logging out once for all, or
Mhm.
logging back once a while.
Yeah.
But
Of course, we don't want to say social media is all evil, because right now we're using like internet and social media technology to connect with each other. But but I think as a charm practitioner, you want to be more aware and mindful of the effects of social media. That's true. I think what I'm trying to present today is just some basic introduction to positive psychology, because I think that's probably something you're less aware of. Because I mean, we could talk about Buddhism, but you don't need me to talk about Buddhism, really. We all study the same thing. So I think what I'm interested in, though, is just present stuff from another culture, and then we could look for similarity and commonality. And I think I will end here today, but just open up for discussion. Like, what would you like to discuss today? How you feel about the topic in general? Feel free to jump in. Jean, I haven't heard anything from you. What do you think?
I have something to say about social media, and it's not positive.
Okay.
I think that our lives were a lot better before social media. Now it's a way for hatred to be spread, for ways to break the law, ways to hurt people, that sort of thing. And I go around and I see all these little children with their smartphones and their technology, and no one seems to be talking to anybody anymore. They're all glued to their phones.
Yeah. And it seems like and we don't see social media spreading things like virtue and past pro-social behavior. It's always the bad behavior that's spread out a lot quicker than the good behaviors, right? Interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. And why is that? Because bad behavior are a lot more sellable. You get a lot more human nature. You get a lot more attention from bad stuff than the good stuff, right? Like when you see good, it's this is something we're just very wired to. We're wired to like negative things, right? We're wired to negative things. That's why we love to watch negative news a lot more sometimes than the positive news. Yeah. Any other? So Debbie, any final thoughts? Oh, Jarrell, you have final thoughts?
Just based on the theme of the talk itself, like flourishing and thriving, I think that adding on to the talk of social media being negative, it's also the capitalistic culture that we currently live in. Like, it's come to a point where things like mindfulness are being distorted. Like, there are many people, especially with the new age type of stuff, they kind of push the concept of mindfulness, but not for like to be wise. It's more of it's becoming more of a technique
Mm-hmm.
for someone or people to get ahead, get that money, grind, etc., rather
Mm.
than what it's really for, which is to find like peace and to let go of attachments.
Yeah,
So there's
yeah.
this thing where the environment that we live in, it keeps pushing an idea of happiness that is material rather than immaterial.
Yeah, there's a term for mindfulness, right? Like if you don't practice correctly, we often call that the mindfulness, right? Or you like McDonald, right? Mindfulness. It's
That's a good one.
yeah. It's yeah, like some of the major corporate companies promoting mindfulness. Isn't it interesting? Like big company promoting mindfulness, big business company are promoting mindfulness. Maria, any idea what that is?
My company has a training next Monday morning, 9 a.m. by the CEO of over, I don't know how many thousand employees. And the title is Mind Your Mind.
What? Mind?
Mind Your Mind, same word, AB, Mind Your Mind.
Okay.
So like a corporation trying to incorporate well-being, wellness into their workforce.
You know how much money they make do meditation?
Right.
You look at like Headspace
Yeah.
or Calm app, they're like billion-dollar business. I'm talking about billion-dollar business. I mean, that's a lot of money. Right?
Yeah, in my company is the same way too. Really big on mindfulness. They offer all sorts of mindfulness class in various different topics.
Uh-huh.
And I think nowadays, especially in the corporate world, I think in the awareness of mental health, it's also in the forefront, top of mind for everybody and for employees.
Mhm.
So I guess one of my questions to you, Peter, is that do you see a relationship between positive psychology and mental health?
Positive psychology is the new trend in mental health. I think I would say the traditional mental health research focus more on the negatives, depression, anxiety, disorders. What positive psychology brings in, and this is the flourishing part, is first to provide a concept that mental health is not the same as mental disorder. So just because you are free from mental disorder, or if just because you are free from mental illness, it does not mean you're mentally healthy. So that's the first thing from positive psychology. Then the next question is, how do you optimize your mental health, whether or not you have mental disorder? So one way positive psychology bring in is, what does it mean to live optimally in general? So from positive psychology point of view, to live optimally means that, and there are different ways to measure that, but someone who live optimally, someone who live well, often tend to have certain amount of positive emotion. They tend to be able to enjoy and engage what they do. They tend to have good relationship with people. Their life usually have some kind of purpose and meaning, and they tend to have a sense of self-efficacy,
Right.
as well as a sense of being proud of what they have done. So that's very different than mental disorder to start with, right? So that is where so positive psychology has a sort of good amount of influence in the current mental health treatment in general, in that sense.
I see. Thank you.
So so I would say that nowadays when we see a psychotherapist, psychotherapy is not just for dealing with problems, but I would say psychotherapy is also for to help you to explore ways to live out your potential. So and I think that's where charm practice can be very helpful, right? Because charm practice is providing some of the basic element that would help us to live a more flourishing lifestyle. And from positive psychology perspective, people who practice virtuous behavior in general will live better compared to others, right? So remember, one of the basic thing that we should do as Buddhists is to cultivate virtue, right? Ethical behaviors and virtue. So this is so they kind of go hand in hand. The charm practice and positive side do go hand in hand in general. So any other final words? Yeah.
I was just curious, like, we know that Buddhism has such an impact on modern psychology. I'm just curious, like, what about the other major religions like Christianity, Catholics? Do they have any contribution to psychology in modern life?
Yeah, I think there's a division in the field of psychological, I mean, they're division 36, psychology and spirituality. So these are the psychologists who are actually focusing on how spirituality can be cultivated, for example. So for example, Columbia, Lisa Miller, one of the well-known researchers in this field, her study is focusing on how when we talk about spiritual awakening, we tend to think of it as like you have to like learn about it, cultivate it, right? But Lisa Miller's research demonstrated that spiritual awakening is more biological than we think. She could actually identify part of the brain that's responsible for spiritual awakening. And it doesn't matter which culture you're from, we more or less have this ability to have this kind of meta-awareness, right? The awareness that we are really small, right? Well, what is spirituality? Spirituality is something that makes us feel smaller, right? Yet at the same time help us to connect with others. So that could be sort of identified to a certain region of the brain. So that would be part of it. Like that would be an example on psychology and spirituality, for example. Yeah. And another professor, David Destano, his research is focusing on how rituals is very important. Doesn't matter which spiritual practice you're in. Rituals itself is quite effective and quite influential. So, and one of his studies is interesting. One of his studies is that he split. So he tested out meditation, right? So he get a bunch of people, split them into two groups. One group of people practice meditation for 8 weeks. Another group of people just practice some basic relaxation. And then what they do is they measure how helpful they are after 8 weeks of meditation. So the way they do it is the participant would walk into the lab, they make them wait in a waiting area, and the participant don't know that's the study. While the participant in the waiting area, the other research assistant would take over the chair, so there's only one spot left. So the participant would sit on a chair. Then another research assistant will come in pretending they're very like tired and like the leg is hurting. And they want to see whether the participant would give up his seat or her seat to that person. Interesting. And the research can show you that those people who practice 8 weeks of meditation, they are a lot more likely than those who didn't to give up their seat. How interesting is that?
Well,
Yep.
Yeah, interesting, right? Yeah. So This is the kind of study psychologists would do. Right. Of course, from a Buddhist perspective, I don't need you to do studies to do any of the stuff I do. I mean, it doesn't matter you have to study for them or not. I'm still gonna meditate. I'm still gonna, do the Zen lifestyle. But I mean, scientists, they have to like try to answer things in a more scientific light. So sounds good.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, because in the past, I'm trying to, stay away from psychology because I know I have some mental issues sometimes. I have depression and anxiety, but I'm trying to stay away from psychology because I know I have Buddha Dharma, I can practice meditation, I can solve my problem. But I mean, your talk today is quite rich in detailed knowledge and how this is going to be helpful to my daily life. So I really appreciate your talk.
Oh, great. Thank you. I think I would recommend, though, I think both East and West have different ways of approaching mental health. And I say that be open-minded. Sometimes the Western approach may help you to understand the Eastern approach better. At least that helps me. So my psychology training helped me to understand Dharma better in general, and vice versa. So it's it could go both ways. It doesn't have to be just one style.
Yeah, thanks.
Sounds good.
Very
We're
good.
9:30. Any other have final words before we close up? Warren, you have any final words?
I just really appreciate that you brought a topic that is not our everyday term practice or Buddhism, and it's a very interesting perspective. It kind of opened, personally opened my my mind to something to think about coming in from a positive psychology. I did not know about psychology has been interested in Buddhism, since the beginning. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's but I think what you brought in today, coming in from a psychology perspective, and how that can interrelate to a couple of the studies that you presented, and sprinkle with some humors in there. It's made this whole thing, it's quite engaging, so, and very
thank
informative.
you for your kind support.
Thank you for doing that.